Good morning. This is Dr. Kempton with the Dr. Kempton Show. And let you know where that came from. I had a radio show on KINA here in Salina, Kansas. In fact, this is where the microphone came from. Is a buddy of mine, Randy, who did the radio show with me, presented this to me when I retired. It says, Dr. Kempton Show, 400 shows, 11:13 to 6:21. That's a long time, and we had a great time doing our radio shows, and I miss it. I miss it so much that I'm now going to start doing some podcasting, and this is one of the first ones that'll be shown to you. So I hope you enjoy it. But to get back to my story, there's a moment in time that completely changed my life. Probably more so than any other time that I could actually think of. Now, there's a lot of times that my life shifted back and forth because of decisions I made. But this point altered my life forever and improved it unbelievably. And that time was with my grandfather between 6th and 7th grade. He came to visit us in Pratt, Kansas, and we went down to a small tavern down there. And in the tavern, the guys would sit down and play dominoes. Well, my granddad always loved talking to people. So we went in, we bought beers. He bought me a root beer, and he bought him a beer. And he went back in the back to sit down and talk with the guys. And he said, why don't you walk up front, just don't get in trouble. I said, okay. So I continued drinking my root beer. And I walked up front. And before I get started, let me tell you where I was. I was a horrendous, terrible reader. Terrible reader. I didn't like reading at all. I like being outside. I like action. I liked fun. I liked doing things. I was the kid who was always in trouble, eyes wandering around the room, the teacher going, Doug, pay attention. Doug, go sit in the corner. Doug, out in the hall. I was talking to people. I was always looking around. So I was always in trouble with that. I know, surprising, right? So I was such a bad reader that between 3rd and 4th grade, I had to go to a reading school all summer long. So for my summer, I spent the mornings, Monday through Friday, hour at a school learning how to read. Between 4th and 5th grade, the next year, I spent 2 weeks at a reading school. And I'm not too sure they taught me anything. I didn't learn a thing. I got a book and they made me read faster. But retention, I don't know. Maybe so. I'm not sure. But it never made me want to read. And that's what you got to do. You got to want to read. And nothing ever made me want to read till that day in the tavern with my granddad. As I was walking around, I reached up and found a book. They had this metal spiral case that you could turn, and it had paperback books in it. And all the books, I remember most of them all being westerns. I didn't want to read a western. In fact, I didn't want to read a book, but I had nothing else to do. So I picked up this one book that was different than all the other books there. And I set it down, set it down, and started looking through it. And I opened it up. And when I opened it up, I read this. In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit. Not a nasty, dirty, wet hole, filled with ends of worms and an oozy smell, nor yet a dry, bare, sandy hole with nothing in it to sit down on or to eat. It was a hobbit hole, and that means comfort. With that paragraph, I was intrigued for the first time in my life to read anything. So I walked over to my granddad and I said, I'd like to buy this book. And I remember him laughing. He goes, oh, you got money? And I said, no. I said, would you buy me this book? And he thought a little bit. I know he had to have been thinking about what kind of reading history I had up to this date. And so he said, yeah, I'll buy you this book if you promise that you will read it. Well, I said, I promise. And then he stuck out his hand. I remember him sticking out his hand down to me. And I looked at that hand knowing that in this time, a handshake from a man to another man was a binding signature. In other words, it kept you true to your word. And I'm fumbling over it because I remember just like that thinking, man, do I really want to shake my granddad's hand and be obligated? And I did anyway. So I shook his hand, and that put me under the obligation to read that. So we left the store. I took the book home, and I read one page. It took me all year to read that book. And that book is The Hobbit. And from then on, my life absolutely changed. Now, the book I'm holding here is not the book that I picked up at the tavern. I've given that book away. In fact, I gave it back to a friend of mine when I was in 8th grade. 7th grade, it took me all year to read The Hobbit. That's how bad a reader I was. It was terrible. It took me all year. In fact, I didn't finish it till the summer. In the summer, I found these 3 books. The Lord of the Rings, the trilogy. And I read those. I read those in 8th grade. Took me all year to read 3 books. Now, I improved a lot. It took me 1 year to read 1 book. Then it took me 1 year to read 3 books. That's improvement. My energy for reading was fired up. And so during my 9th grade year, I read every science fiction and fantasy book in the library at the junior high. Now, that's not a lot of books. It was probably a section of probably about this long of those books. There's probably about 20, maybe 30 books that I finished off that year. And I just dove into books after that. I did a lot of reading. A lot of them Tolkien, a lot of them fantasy, Tarzan, all those types of books. It really got me fired up. In fact, that's what helped me get through chiropractic college. Now, another book that changed my life is Think and Grow Rich. Now, I still have in my library at least 8 books of Think and Grow Rich. I have yet to finish one of those books. Every time I get ready to read Think and Grow Rich, I go buy another one. And it's just something about it. Because when my dad told me, you never own a book till you start to write in it, underline things, write in it, make things yours. So the book becomes yours when you write in it, when you underline. And so every time I do Think and Grow Rich, I buy a new one, and I underline and I find new things. And the reason I quit is because I get so fired up about those things, those ideas that they have, that I put it down and start doing them. And then I come back 2 or 3 years later and I go, I need to finish a book. And then I go buy one. Anyway, so that's got me through college, that got me through life, and it got me where I am today. The last Hobbit book that I've given away, and I've given away, like I said, 15 to 20 of them. I don't own any of them anymore, except for this one. This is the last one I've got. It's leather bound. I got it. And the last one I've given away was to my grandson, Thomas. And I hope it intrigues him enough to make him start reading. Now, as you can see up here, I've got a lot of books. All the ones over on the shelf there that you can see are J.R. Tolkien. The ones down below are Palmer. Those are the green books. Down below that is the diaries from my dad. He's passed away, and I've been reading through those. Below that are more science fiction books. I've got a wall in my clinic that is probably 9 foot tall by 10 foot wide, and it's top to bottom, wall to wall, full of paperbacks. I read those in about 6 years. I've got tubs full of paperback books that I've read. And I've read anything and everything I can. If you want to find a good book, I'm going to tell you right now, Hobbit is a good place to start. But Tarzan is another one. Think and Grow Rich. Just a whole bunch of different books. They're all out there. And each one has their own. My dad said there's nothing worse than a book unread. And then he smiled and he said, except for one thing, and that's a book not yet written. And my dad started writing books. I remember, I think maybe it was that day he decided to do that. So he started writing. I've got a bunch of his writings out, and we're going to make a book out of that. But anyway, just to get back to you as a person, if you don't read, please pick up a book and find a book that intrigues you. You don't have to pick up a book, and you don't have to read it. But you do have to find a book that intrigues you. And that's the challenge. That's the first challenge to reading, is finding a book that intrigues you. And there's a lot of books out there. And not every book is a great book. But every book deserves to be looked at and evaluated. So that's kind of the thing I want to do. The other part is, if you're a parent or a grandparent, I want you to look at your grandchildren and your children, and the next time they ask you for something, it may be a ball glove, it may be a bat, it may be a soccer ball, it may be the Hobbit. But before you say no, and I know grandparents say yes more than parents do, but we get in the habit of saying no at some of the most important times in a child's life. So the next time your child, grandchild asks you for something, step back a little bit, think hard, and maybe say yes to the Hobbit and change your life along with your child or grandchild. So, this is Dr. Kempton with the Dr. Kempton Show. We'll be back.